this episode of Viral Rewind, we're looking at the Pizelun DOS virus. Now, this is a memory-resident stealth encrypted virus, so when it's first loaded, it is going to reside in computer memory and infect programs as we run them, including stuff with using the directory command. And because it's encrypted, we're not going to be able to see a whole lot of details in the infected files, and because it's stealthy, we're not going to be able to witness the file size changes. So we got Pizelun in our DOS directory there, and take note that also our volume of drive C is DOS, and a couple of other things, because Pizelun has some interesting payloads associated with it that's going to change some things around after we run it on its payload date. So when we run Pizelun, it just returns us back to the command prompt, but it has loaded itself in memory, hooking interrupt 21H to intercept any files that we run, and it will infect .com and .exe files. Right off the bat, it infects command.com when we first load it, so that guarantees that Pizelun loads whenever the system is booted. But as I said, it also makes use of the directory command, so every time we run directory, it's going to search out files on the disk, so it's not limited to the directory we run it in. Any .com or .exe files on the disk, Pizelun will search out when the directory command is used and infect them with its code. Again, aside from simply just running .coms and .exe files and infecting them that way. So that's pretty much how the infection works. So we're just going to go ahead and jump to the payload date. So the payload date is specifically May of 1995. Now, it doesn't matter what day in May, but as long as it's May 1995, its payloads will work there. They will not work in any other period. So we'll set that. And then let's go ahead and restart and let the computer boot up on that date. So the very first thing we get there is this little message that says Pizelun activado activatismo. Primera tasto to continue. So the virus is written in Italian, and the whole name of it is derived from that. But anyway, the message they have here says is Pizelun activated, very active. Press any key to continue. And the other thing it's done is one of its payloads is going right now, aside from displaying the message, is if we look on our keyboard, it's cycling through the numlock, caps lock, and scroll lock keys pretty rapidly there, one after the other. This is one of its payloads already apparent, aside from our text printout that's going on. So let's get that, and you probably just saw another payload of Pizelun right there. And let me close down the iris so it doesn't overwhelm the camera. So we saw there that it inverted the colors of the computer. Now, one thing I'm going to go ahead and do before we get too far, of course, we'll see another payload right here in DOS. If you look in DOS, you see that all of our font is all lowercase. There's no uppercase anymore. So one thing I'm going to go ahead and do here is try and run our program to get our nice 60 Hz refresh rate. So yeah, now we can see it a little more clearly. Everything in DOS here is all being displayed now in lowercase, and as we saw from when we started this video, everything was in uppercase, so it has changed the font around. Now, one of the things that Pizelun has done, aside from hooking into interrupt 21H, is that it also hooks in to interrupt 8, 15H, and I think 11H. I'll have to correct that if it's wrong, but it takes over the system timer, the system BIOS services, and the BIOS video output, which, as you can guess from that, is going to also be one of the payloads involved if it has something to do with video. Let me back out of this back to our DOS shell. And again, you can see that payload going on with the color inversion, and this is pretty evident in any full screen graphical program. So I'm going to use the Prodigy service here just to show that. So normally the Prodigy service does not have background colors like this. All the colors on it are inverted. So usually this is kind of a black or blue, and then here it's got more of this bright yellow and then red on the bottom. So that's one of the things Pizelun does as well, is invert the color palette of your full scale, not full scale, but full screen graphical DOS applications, but that doesn't come back here to the DOS prompt. Sometimes it will, depending on the application, but usually it's just the application itself that has the effect going on. One other possible payload I've seen too, when I've been trying stuff, has to involve using the floppy drive with write-protected disks. So we've got just our VGA 240 program on there, but I'm going to try to copy the program to the hard drive while Pizelun is loaded in memory, and of course I've also got it on its payload date. Now I don't know if this applies if it's just in memory or if it has to be on the payload date, but I'm just curious here what it will do. So we got an interesting error here. Number one, you heard that Pizelun was trying to infect the write-protected floppy disk and it failed. And because it's realized the disk is write-protected and can't do anything, it actually denies file access in a rather interesting way, because if you look at the error there, it says file not found VGA240p.ISE, and we were looking for VGA240.exe. So Pizelun has actually intercepted it and retyped it so that the file can't be found. And I assume this would apply if you try to run a program or anything else like that off a write-protected floppy disk. Pizelun will just outright deny access to the file by confusing DOS, thinking that you've got the wrong file name being specified. So that's one of the other potential payloads or even side effect of having Pizelun running on the system. So we've seen what it does with affecting the graphical backgrounds. We've seen what it's doing here, of course, with the keyboard lights scrolling through that. And it is affecting it because if we were running Microsoft Works or something, every time caps lock or scroll lock would come on, a computer would complain about it. And so, again, we got the lowercase font here in DOS. We got the thing going on with the floppy drive. The other thing too, and you can see it on the screen right here, is if you look at the volume of the drives, it says drive A is Pizelun. If we look at the directory of C, it also says Pizelun, and that's because when Pizelun is loaded in memory and is active on the payload date, it changes the volume label of all drives to Pizelun. It doesn't actually change them on there, it just makes it appear that way when the payload date is active when it's loaded in memory. So that's pretty much most of the payloads. So now the very last payload that Pizelun has is whenever the user presses the Control-Alt-Delete key to try to reboot the computer. And this happens. We get this snowy effect complete with sound like you would have on an old CRT television or something with no cables. And it hangs the computer here. You can't do anything with that except physically power the system off. So that's basically the last payload there of Pizelun. Again, as I say, it's got pretty much about 4 to 5, maybe even 6 distinct payloads with it, but they only happen on May of 1995. So aside from its infection of .com and .exe files when you access them or when using the directory command, that's what you get with the payloads. So that is basically it for the Pizelun DOS virus.